everybody, welcome. Welcome to the Kellogg Hubbard Library. Exits, if we needed to exit quickly, there is an emergency exit right there, and then the door that you came in through. There is a restroom around the corner if you head that way, and then you take a right toward the train table. There's a restroom there. I'm here to introduce you to our wonderful presenter today, and she's going to take it away. This is Mela Landis Marinello, and I'm going to let her do her thing.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming. As Nicole said, my name is Mela. I'm a junior at E32 High School. I'm a part of the pilot program, which is the independent learning program there. And so one of my studies has been learning about the women's suffrage movement. And this is my third year in the program. I've been in it for all of high school. I've done social studies independently every year. And I've been keeping expanding on how I share my learning with the community. I started by presenting to the middle schoolers at our school, and now I wanted to really open it up to the broader community. So yeah, the goal of this is to really be a community discussion for a lot of it, and then I have a short presentation on some of my learning about the women's suffrage movement. But since it is a discussion, we have someone from Orca Media recording, and I just wanted to make sure people are comfortable with the discussion part being recorded. Otherwise, we can just record the presentation. But are people okay with that part being recorded? Okay, thank you. It'll help me document my work for the project. So, yeah, if we want to just go around, share who everyone is. I'm Mela. I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Dottie. I'm from the Vermont League of Women Voters.
I'm Catherine. I'm up to it.
I'm Anna. Katie, she, her.
Michaela, she, her.
Talitha, she, her.
Tenzo, he, him.
Owen, he, him.
Melissa, she, her.
Rosie, she, they.
Hi, I'm Jane. I'm from Grapevine Books. I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Susan, she, her.
I'm Anna. I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Una, I use they, them pronouns.
I'm Lenny. I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Lula, I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Karen, I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Shelley, she, he, call me what you like. He, she, they, call me what you may.
I'm Meg. She, her pronouns. I'm a U32 librarian.
I'm Opeyemi, pronounce that 4-syllable name, and that's good enough for me. And I live right down the road at Pioneer Apartments.
Nathan. I'm Gail.
And I'm Ann.
Kyle, him.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. So the first thing, I just want people to turn to whoever is around you, discuss when you think of suffrage, what do you think of, and who do you think of, and then we can kind of share out as a group. But I'll give you a few minutes to talk to who's around you and brainstorm.
Well, I did and stuff and so unfortunately about the South and
But I like
what do you think?
I really thought what is it? It's like when people, you know, it's really just like, you know, so that's
Here, let's get these guys.
that's what I think of.
I guess I'm just thinking of stars and like the.
There's spots up there.
Right here.
Just go around.
I know.
Well, tell me something. Yeah, I mean, it's a couple of things that just like it might be hard to share. I think we're close to it.
Way back.
What?
Carrie Nation.
They just jumped in.
Okay, so if people want to finish up what they're talking about, does anyone want to we can kind of popcorn around and share out some of the things that you discussed. Anyone can start.
I had an immediate, vivid image of Mrs. Banks and Mary Poppins marching to the door. That's right.
Do I raise my hand?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Sojourner Truth, and that other woman, I always forget her name. I also think of the Seneca Falls Convention from 1848, and their little, what was it? It was either a Declaration of Independence or a Constitution that they came up with, outlining all the things of women getting the right to vote. That was in 1848, so that was long before they got it, but yeah, and a lot of other things, like maybe the ERA, I think, the Equal Rights Amendment, maybe was proposed. So, cool.
Susan B. Anthony.
Susan B. Anthony,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
That's what I have.
Anthony? Yeah.
I was going to say Lucretia Mott, and I was thinking about how stunning it is that this has been going on for so long and we still haven't got the Equal Rights Amendment passed.
Phyllis Schlafly.
I think about the Haudenosaunee
people and how they had a big role in the suffrage, but they haven't been recognized. And also Black women who were left out and or marginalized and were part of this too.
Yeah.
Anything else? Yeah.
Alice Paul, that died in 1977, not quite getting that through, but she persisted.
Yeah. Okay, thank you everyone for sharing. So this is the title of one of my books that I have been studying. So Meg from U32 has been my mentor. We've been reading these books and discussing them together. We started with Women Race and Class for the first semester by Angela Davis. And now we've just started this one, The Trouble with White Women. We have read the introduction and the first chapter, which was focused on suffrage specifically, but then it goes on through other struggles throughout history for gender rights, among other things. So I have an excerpt of this book, which I'll pass around. So I'm going to give people 10 minutes to read. There's 2 packets. These are the excerpts of the book, and these are some definitions to look at to reference while you're reading. I think you might need a couple more.
Yeah. Okay.
We also
Yeah.
How many did you make?
25.
Yep, I'll make about 10 more.
And then I can also, if someone just wants a book. This book, The Trouble with White Women, it's a pretty radical book. It was published pretty recently. It called itself Counter History of Feminism, so challenging the traditional narrative. And it talks about how white women have been very centered and focused in the narrative of feminism, and how that's not accurate, and how we need to learn about that and combat that today to have a better future. So, the introduction talks about the ideas of white feminism versus intersectional feminism, which we are going to talk about. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes to read. While you're reading, pay attention to what stands out to you, like what's provocative, not necessarily something that stands out as negative or bad, but something that just sparks a reaction. Pay attention to your internal biases, and just consider how the ideas mentioned in the text could challenge or affirm your own beliefs or experiences, and approach it with an open mind. What you read might be pretty shocking, but it's important to discuss. So.
And we need some more copies.
Okay.
They're coming. More copies?
Oh, yeah.
Excellent.
I was trying to figure out where do we need them? Down the front? Okay. I'll grab 2 more.
I'm also going to pass these around, pencils and highlighters, if anyone wants them. Pass it around. Let's just pass it around.
we'll take one, yeah.
Oh, really?
I got this point. I have the book.
Anybody else?
Everything good?
Toss this in the basket.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the discussion segment. No worries, I know it's kind of a long excerpt and there's a lot of information packed in there. So I'm just going to read, this is from page 7, just a paragraph that's particularly important about kind of what intersectionality means, because there's a lot of misconceptions around this. So, a person cannot be intersectional, only a politics can be intersectional. The experiences of marginalized people expose the true workings of power in all of its forms. Identity forms a key piece of intersectionality, but it provides the lens, not the target. In the words of my colleague Brittany Cooper, intersectionality was never meant to be an account of identity. It was meant to be an account of how structures of power interact. So, I just want to start with that, since I know it was at the end and not everyone got to it, but it's really important to go in with an intersectional lens to this discussion. So just some norms. Everyone's learning. I know this is a lot of information all at once. I've been working towards learning things in this subject for 3 years. So yeah. Judgment-free space. I'm hoping that people will be brave to share things. I know some things might make you a little uncomfortable learning so much new information at once, but just have an open mind to be respectful. So yeah, I'm going to open it up and for people to share what sparked something for you as you read, and maybe if you have an idea why it sparked something for you, and then which ideas challenged or affirmed your experiences and beliefs. So, yeah, anyone wants to speak?
I would just like to start with the Audre Lorde quote that I really just love. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. I think that's really, really perfect for the idea of white feminism and how it so feeds into this idea of this white systemically racist society that we have, and the fact that white women benefit from it so deeply in so many ways, and how white feminism really uses those benefits to get ahead, and I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. I didn't get the end, but I thought it was really interesting and fun. Thank you. Anything else that people want to share, a specific quote or respond to something Evie said, or bring people's attention to a new section? Yeah.
I'm just really struck at how naive I am. Maybe it's an age thing, but a lot of it's really new to me. And I really appreciate you bringing it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, even for me, reading this book, because I started learning about Kimberly Crenshaw and intersectional feminism when I was in 9th grade, but some of the things in here shocked me as well. And yeah, I just wanted to share it with more people because it's a really great resource, and I think, especially in these times, it's something that we need to keep discussing and learning. So, does anyone else have things that stood out to them, or something they want to share, or a quote? Yeah.
On your first page at the bottom, you have that if you look at all of this, liberals' favorite elixirs, awareness, diversity, equity, and inclusion, even that is under attack, right? Even that is under attack right now. So it really says something about how quickly we're going backwards or trying to go backwards.
Yeah, thank you for bringing our attention to that. And I think that's really important too. That was something that surprised me when I first read it, but that expanding white feminism's tent will not transform the materials of which it was made, similar to the Audre Lorde quote, that really we need full systemic change, because all of these systems of oppression are tied into each other, and working to get rid of one is not gonna get rid of all of them, and it'll only benefit some.
May I say one more thing?
Yeah.
Which is, I'm old enough, 68, to remember when Clarence Thomas became a Supreme Court justice. If you want to really analyze white women and black women where we did not work together, look at what happened from Thurgood Marshall to Clarence Thomas. That was an insult in and of itself. Biden was a part of that in a very significant way. So was Edward Kennedy in a very significant way. So was my representative, my senator, Barbara Mikulski from Maryland, who was the only one who stood up and said no. Okay? So go back and do your stories and your history.
Thank you.
I have something that stood out to me from the page 5. The fight for gender justice, but also just justice in general, must be led by those most affected by the systems of exploitation working, and also working in coalition with everyone else. Just very, like, I know it's important to me, or it's important, and it's not always thought of.
Yeah, sharing that. Are there any ideas people have? Yeah, Jane.
I was just thinking how I only learned about like Susan B. Anthony. We like to, empires like to have heroes, and they like to put all the, awards on like one person or a few people, and how that leaves out the people. And it leaves out intersectionality when you're just talking about one person who did all the work, and you don't hear about actually the movements, and that's where the work happens.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'll talk about that in my presentation part about Susan B. Anthony and some of the other activists who haven't been recognized. Anything else before we move on? Any other quotes or ideas people have? Yeah.
I don't remember exactly where it was, but talking about how this has been like an ongoing like schism or like separate set of movements since its inception. And thinking about, Frederick Douglass being at the Declaration of Sentiments meeting and signing that. And then when the 15th Amendment was going up to, be passed and ratified and everything, how, and I'm sure you're going to talk about this, but the quick turn that happened from these white feminists to people like Frederick Douglass, who had stood with them when getting some progress for Black men to get the vote was put ahead of women, like immediately the racial slurs came out.
Yeah. Okay, so next, I will be talking about some of those things that came up in the discussion. This is just a broad overview of some of the important and interesting things I learned about, but I've been focusing all semester on it, so it was very hard to consolidate into a short presentation. But yeah, so starting with a quote, "White supremacy will be strengthened, not weakened, by women's suffrage." If anyone thinks they know who said this, I'll give you a second to make a guess. Yeah. It's a good guess. You're close, but not quite. What was it? Susan B. Anthony.
It wasn't with Lady Stanton?
No. You're right direction, but not quite. So, this is Carrie Chapman Catt in Women's Suffrage by Federal Constitutional Amendment, which was a collection of essays. She was a suffragist, a leader of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, which we'll talk more about, and the founder of the League of Women Voters in 1920. And so she did a lot of amazing work for women's rights, but obviously very focused on white women's rights, and that's often not part of the picture when people talk about her and Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and others who are, famous for their suffrage work, but as Anna was saying, like there was a lot of racial tensions that these white suffragists aren't really held accountable for when we teach history.
So was she saying that to kind of?
It's a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's my question. It sounds like she's saying that that's what she wants.
Yeah.
And that's why she's promoting women's suffrage.
Yeah.
Calm the men down.
Yeah. And there was also, it was common for white women to be like, well, when we get the vote, everything will be better. Just like such, upholding these ideas of such moral superiority that once white women could vote, like the world and society would just improve automatically, which obviously is not quite how it works. But yeah, so she, you'll see in some other quotes as well, like it got to a point where these white suffragists could say things like this, and like outright admit that they were wanting the vote to uphold and strengthen white supremacy, and they could get away with it. And that's not always recognized in the way we teach history. So, a couple of background things. So a lot of the early suffragists started in the abolitionist movement. Here are just a few: Frederick Douglass, Susan B. Anthony, Sojourner Truth, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were all involved in the abolitionist movement, and then became involved in the suffragist movement as well. And you'll see later, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, like they were in the abolitionist movement, but after emancipation, when they were focused on suffrage, they were really focused on benefiting white women, and kind of abandoned the people of color who they had originally been advocating for. And then another small detail, so I did not know this at the beginning of the year, but I looked into it because a lot of people use suffragist and suffragette interchangeably. But in the US, the suffragist is an advocate for voting rights, often for women. And a suffragette was a term used to demean American suffragists, like the jet part meaning like small. And this was reclaimed in Europe, but it wasn't really reclaimed in the US. It was still used as a demeaning term. So this came up in the discussion. The Seneca Falls Convention, July 19th to 20th of 1848. This is often thought of as like the start of the women's suffrage movement, which is not entirely true. It was a really big event and kind of the start of the white women's suffrage movement and how it was known in history. But there was other like moves and activism for women to have voting rights before that. So here's some quotes from Women Racing Class to give a little context. So there was not a single black woman in attendance at the convention. And the Seneca Falls Declaration, which Evie mentioned, the Declaration of Sentiments, it was created based on the Declaration of Independence. I did a project comparing the two documents, and they used very similar language. It was very well done and made a very clear point that women deserve the right to vote. Actually, it was about voting, but it was also about a lot of other fundamental rights that women and all people deserve. And voting was actually the one resolution that was controversial at the time. And so, yeah, the Seneca Falls Declaration proposed an analysis of the female condition, which disregarded the circumstances of women outside the social class of the document's framers. So it was written by women like Susan B. Anthony and focused on how white middle-class women could obtain the vote. So, as Kayla mentioned, Haudenosaunee influence, I read this book, Sisters in Spirit by Sally Roche Wagner. It talked about how Native American women lived and live in matrilineal communities, and how white suffragists, including Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Matilda Joslyn Gage, and Lucretia Mott, actually took inspiration from these Indigenous women and the examples of gender equality these suffragists observed in these Indigenous communities. So that's another piece of history that's like not super well known, but important to recognize. But I also had to do a lot of combining what I was learning, because this book mostly talked about the relationship between white women and Native women, and women, race, and class was about white women and women of color, but did not really include Indigenous women. This book does it all, I'm pretty sure. I haven't read the whole thing yet. Yeah.
Question. Matrilineal means like kind of matriarchal a lot of the time. Is that what it means?
Yeah. Yeah, if anyone else has questions, because I'm packing a lot of information in there, feel free to stop me. But there were a lot of divides in the women's suffrage movement. Here are some of the big ones. So Alice Paul and the National Women's Party was one group, and then Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, Carrie Chapman Catt, and the NASA group. They were kind of opposing groups of white women in the movement. So Alice Paul, they had very militant tactics, and they were pushing for a national amendment, compared to NASA, which was very polite and more slow state-by-state campaigns. So there was a lot of divides, even just between the white women leaders in the movement. And then both of the organizations here were led by white women, and they made lots of racist comments and actions, and just prioritized voting rights for white women.
There was an age thing there too.
Yeah.
Alice Paul and her crew were like right out of college, and they were raring to go, and the other one were old school, let's do it through the legislature. And the other ones were like, get a horse, get a parade, let's go.
Yeah.
What do you mean by militant tactics?
Militant, so for example, picketing in front of the White House, they burned like a big kind of photo thing of Woodrow Wilson, who was president at the time and was not supporting a suffrage amendment. They went, when they were picketing, they got arrested, which I'll talk more about, and then went on hunger strikes. So it was just a lot more like intense compared to the more traditional group of older suffragists who were very like polite and weren't really willing to push boundaries.
There's a 1990s movie that stands up pretty well called Iron-Jawed Angels that talks about that age split and the 70 years.
I've been told to watch that so many times.
This is your sign.
Yeah, so the American Equal Rights Association was where Black liberation and women's liberation briefly intercrossed, only for like 3 years. But so it was formed to fight for universal suffrage regardless of race, color, or sex. That's how it started in 1866. But then in the middle here, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony racistly opposed the 15th Amendment, which would give Black men the right to vote. And Frederick Douglass advocated for the 15th Amendment because suffrage was a survival measure for Black men being attacked by mobs post-slavery. So within the span of these 3 years, they briefly worked together, but then in 1869, it dissolved, with Stanton and Anthony splitting off to start the National Women's Suffrage Association, which is NASA, and pro-15th Amendment suffragists Lucy Stone and Julia Ward Howe founded the American Women's Suffrage Association. So they really split over the 15th Amendment. And then the 1913 Women's Suffrage Parade was organized by Alice Paul at the beginning of when she was starting the National Women's Party. As Shelley was saying, this is like the group of young, fresh out of college suffragists who were like, we need to do something big if we want to make change. So, but Alice Paul too was sometimes racist, and she felt pressure from Southern donors. She didn't want to lose funding and support from them, so she asked women of color to march in their own like delegation in the back instead of with state delegations. And again, like Alice Paul, she also created the Equal Rights Amendment. So she's really held up as this figure who's done a lot for women's rights, and she has, but it's also important to realize, like, she asked Ida B. Wells and other women of color to march in the back at this march. So, and Ida B. Wells rejected this racist notion and marched in her suffrage delegation like she originally planned. Yeah, so the National Women's Party, after the 1913 suffrage parade, Alice Paul and the other more militant younger suffragists broke away from NASA and created the National Women's Party. This is a photo of them picketing. Many of them were arrested for picketing in front of the White House and obstructing traffic because they couldn't think of anything else to arrest them for. It wasn't illegal. And they refused to pay the fine, so they were thrown in the Occoquan Workhouse in Virginia, where they continued to protest, and they went on hunger strikes, which led to them being force-fed by the government, and then President Woodrow Wilson saying, everything's fine, they're being treated well in the prison, everything's fine. So that was also really suppressed in the media at the time. So I've already been talking about this, but some more examples of racism in the movement. Susan B. Anthony is on the silver dollar. She's very held up as an icon and like the leader of the suffrage movement. But this is from Women, Race, and Class. Her presumably neutral public posture towards the fight for Black equality did indeed bolster the influence of racism within the National Women's Suffrage Association. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton and others who believed that because in their eyes emancipation had rendered Black people equal to white women, the vote would render Black men superior. They were absolutely opposed to Black male suffrage. Obviously, emancipation didn't immediately make people make Black people equal to white women, how they were treated in society. And so the vote was necessary for Black women as Black women and Black men, as Frederick Douglass said, and it wasn't going to make them superior. So, yeah, and then from the Trouble with White Women, Kyla Scheller says, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, in other words, invented white feminism. So, here are some quick suffragist spotlights. Sojourner Truth, she came up earlier. She was a formerly enslaved woman, became an advocate for abolition, temperance, and civil and women's rights in the 19th century. Frederick Douglass also came up earlier. He was the most important leader of the movement for African American civil rights in the 19th century. After escaping slavery, he became a national leader in the abolitionist movement in Massachusetts and New York, as well as advocating for women's suffrage. So, Frances Harper, she was the first African American woman to publish a short story, an influential abolitionist and a suffragist. She co-founded the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. She also, they talked about in here, when Stanton and Anthony wrote a 6-volume history of women's suffrage, they left a lot of people out, including a pivotal speech that Frances Harper had at the 1866 convention of the American Equal Rights Association. And the Trouble with White Women says that's probably the reason that no one knows about her today, is because she wasn't included in this 6-volume history, which is, you know, the history that a lot of people look to for the history of the suffrage movement. So, and then Ida B. Wells, she was emancipated in 1865. She was a journalist, a suffragist, and an anti-lynching advocate. So, yeah. And then this is, in 1920, the 19th Amendment passed, granting women the right to vote, but it really didn't apply to a lot of women still. So, in the South, Black women were prohibited from voting still by election laws in individual states, such as literacy tests, poll taxes, and voter ID requirements, and by rising violence from the KKK. I learned this last night as I was working on my presentation, that in the 1920s, right after white women got the right to vote, a branch of the KKK was formed, a women-led branch. And Kathleen Blee, a sociology professor, argues that the very expansion of white women's access to the franchise laid the foundation for a hate group that was by women, for women, and of women. So that's really hidden history. I've been learning about it for a semester, and I learned about that last night. So, and then the Voting Rights Act of 1965 began to clear the path to the voting booth for people of color. But as Dottie will talk about, there's still a lot of barriers to voting today. So, and then women's suffrage in the media. I was originally hoping to do a book group for this, but it was very hard to find a book that represented all of this history well. These were some of the books I was considering. I watched Iron Jawed Angels, which provides a very good background history of it, but it really didn't address the racial tensions very much. And then Suffs, which is a musical. Both of these two were focused on Alice Paul and the National Women's Party. And Suffs did acknowledge a lot of the racial tensions. But another thing I discovered last night, there's a website called cancelsuffs.com. I recommend looking it up. There's a lot of great resources on it. I loved Suffs. It was amazing. I also love theater, but I would recommend looking at the website as well because they have a lot of really great resources. And I think Suffs is a great start to having a more inclusive and accurate history, but also this website pointed out that the focus was still on Alice Paul instead of Ida B. Wells, and it's still, to some extent, whitewashing the history. So, I'm going to hand it over to Dottie from the League of Women Voters to talk about current barriers to voting access.
So my name is Dottie Ricks. I'm a 35-year member of the League of Women Voters, which doesn't look so good here, but when I heard this, I went, am I white? Am I a white feminist? And then, so I'm looking at it, I'm going, yeah, we may even invite you to come to the League and, discuss some of this. I've been so focused on voting rights and abortion rights all my life that, I just never even thought about this. So anyway, the last 25 years have been here in Vermont, despite my southern accent. I can't get rid of it. And as I said, my major interests were voting rights, remain voting rights, and I was the lead person for the League of Women Voters, along with Planned Parenthood, in helping strategize to pass I'm blanking, the Reproductive Liberty Act. So our motto is empowering voters, defending democracy. We do this by working to protect the freedom to vote, to improve elections, to reduce money's political influence, and to fight for fair redistricting. According to the Brenner Center for Justice at the New York School of Law, over the last 20 years, states have erected more and more barriers to the ballot box. In 2013, these efforts received a boost when the Supreme Court weakened the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and these barriers have surged since the 2020 election. Such anti-democratic measures have kept significant numbers of eligible voters from the polls, especially among different races, poorer people, and younger and older voters. I have 5 minutes to tell you about barriers to voting here in the U.S. So instead of lecturing, I was going to give you examples, and then it's still 10 minutes long. So what I'm going to do is list the half of them that I'm able to present to you, and then I will give you some examples of only a few. And when I ask you, what do you do, I want you to put yourself in the position of the person that is in that position. What did they do? And the answer is they don't vote. because of the barriers. So the first one is voter ID requirements. The second one is a lack of language access, which is required by the U.S. to have access to a vote or information in your language. There are many voter poll purges under the guise of, updating or consolidating voter rolls. Many eligible voters are removed. There are enormous numbers of polling place closures, which is under the guise of consolidation. So you're an older person or a minority or have few means of transportation. You go to the polls at which you have voted for years, only to find out it is closed. The next closest poll is 35 miles away. Perhaps you're able to get to the next closest poll, but with the consolidations, you're in line for an hour and a half, and you have 15 minutes left to get to work. What do? You don't vote. These are examples of the impact of polling place closures, thousands of which have happened over the past few years, and in predominantly minority districts, and are done in the name of consolidations. Okay, so there's also the lack of funding for elections. People have reduced early voting, and early voting was to help get rid of the crunch, at the polls, so that people wouldn't, be all crowded. And now it's being used as a barrier to voting. There's reduced voting hours. Your work shift is from 7 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. You go immediately to the polls only to find the polls closed at 4. What do you do? An example of reducing voting by reducing hours of access to voting. There's gerrymandering of voting districts, and this just appalls me. It gives me a headache even, reading about it. You have voted for your current representative for several years now, and she has represented you royally. You find out you don't have the option of voting for her in this election because district lines have been redrawn and she is in another district. Or you are able to vote for her, but because your district has been reduced and combined with a larger community of differing views, she has lost the election. What do you do? This is an example of gerrymandering or shaping a district so that representation will be diluted. This was used quite a lot in the South to prevent, African Americans from voting. Use of intimidation tactics, and this has increased exponentially over the past 8 years. You go to the polls, there are several folks standing outside the polling area. Their arms are crossed over their chest. They glare at you as you stand in a long line to vote. You are afraid. Or someone starts shouting at you as you approach the polling area. Or someone takes your picture as you go in to vote. What do you do? These are intimidation tactics to prevent your voting. Voting intimidation is illegal in the United States. Yet NPR reports that since the 2000 election, these tactics have increased exponentially. These are about half of the barriers to voting that I found prevalent in our country now. But I can't get to all of them in my allotted time, and some of these examples are simplified and made more dire. And I want you to know that the majority of poll workers, because I have been one, are decent, honest people that support democracy. But these are examples of actions that undermine the ability of some to vote. And they do happen. I mean, even here, gerrymandering has happened in Vermont on many occasions to dilute a vote. In so doing, these actions undermine our ability to rule as a people. for the people and by the people. So what does the increase of barriers to voting mean? Quite simply, it means that we run the risk of losing our democracy. Democracy is a form of government in which power is invested in the people and exercised by them, usually through a freely elected body of representatives. If people can't vote, they have no power. We run the risk of losing our world status as the leader of democracy. If democracy means rule by the people and the people can't rule because they can't vote, then how can we claim to be democratic? We run the risk of losing the Western alliance. Since the end of World War II, we have led an alliance of democratic countries. Already, many of those countries have joined together outside of the U.S.'s influence and moved to protect democracy in a European-led coalition. They've lost faith in us. What do? As individuals, first and foremost, we support voting. And I will stand on the Capitol building and shout that out. We must support voting. We cannot get discouraged, however discouraging elections can be, such as the last one. But first and foremost, we register to vote as soon as we can, and we vote at every election that comes up. Local elections are equally as important as national ones, as local elections build the base of our government, the government that most immediately affects us. And then we register others to vote. And then we go to the polls and offer to bring people so that people can get out and vote. And through doing that, we kick the rascals out. We educate the public. We address alternative truths, well, lies, about what is happening. We remind the public what is democracy and what democracy looks like. Whether through writing letters to the editor, protesting in groups, or protesting individually, or tossing tea in Boston's harbor. We support groups that support democracy, such as the League. There are so many others, but I didn't have time to research them, and we are nonpartisan, so I can't recommend folks that I don't know if they're nonpartisan or not, but there are so many, and you can Google them. We enlist our representatives to fight for democracy, and for our reps, I think that's a fulfilling kind of thing to do. It's easy. We aid others in other states, and this is so important. We aid others in other states that don't have the strong democratic base that we have, whether it's making phone calls, writing letters, sending emails. In short, we do what those women did in the suffragist movement. We organize, organize, organize. And we join with like-minded individuals and brainstorm what we can do. I don't have all the answers. I'm learning new things all the time. This is so new to me, and I'm grateful. Those of you who are young and creative, you have the power to do this work from a new and fresh perspective. As groups, we work to do the following. Number one, we as voters need to insist that Congress enact the full protection of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 by passing the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and state laws must be required to implement those safeguards. We need to insist that Congress pass the Freedom to Vote Act, which would protect voting rights, end partisan gerrymandering, close campaign finance loopholes, and shore up the electoral process. Congress and states must, number three, Congress and states must pass laws that protect voters from mass challenges and voter roll purges. Mass challenges, I didn't know what that was, are where thousands of folks get together and bombard the polls, questioning if a person has the right to vote. Not just one person. In some states, any person can go up and question whether a person has the right to vote. But these mass challenges are when thousands of people do that. What do? you don't vote. So we must ensure that Congress passes the Deceptive Practices and Voter Intimidation Prevention Act, and states should also penalize and correct false information at preventing voting or voter registration. And how do we do all of the above? The bottom line is to get out and vote and organize, organize, organize. So in conclusion, if you take anything away from this talk today, then take this with you. The more people that vote, the stronger our democracy. I repeat, the more people that vote, the stronger our democracy. Remember that democracy is a system of government by the people being governed, usually through elected representatives. Eliminating barriers to voting increases the number of people that can make choices through their vote. Having more people to vote can only improve our government by the people. Notice, democracy is not a government by a few people who get to choose, but by all of the people. It has never been more urgent in our history than now for us to work together to save our democracy. Those that oppose voting rights and access to voting oppose democracy and the very foundation of our government and culture. If we want to maintain our democracy, we must increase, not decrease, the numbers of those that vote. Of course, this is based upon the assumption that we as a nation want to have a democracy and want the voices of all of us to be heard. I'm deeply concerned that current leaders don't believe in democracy, but in winning at all costs, that don't believe in an international order based on respect for human rights, that are authoritarian, lawless autocrats that admire similar characters at home and abroad. I encourage you to use your voices through the vote and through actively organizing to be a part of making democracy in our country not weaker, but stronger. Your vote is your voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Dottie. So I want to end this presentation section with a quote from The Trouble with White Women. To know the Catholic history of feminism is to have an emerging blueprint for collective future. That's from this book. Okay. Yeah, and I know we're running out of time, so if anyone has to leave right away, that's totally fine. But for those who can stay for a few minutes, I want to open it up to one last bit of discussion. Say anything you want, but here are some prompts. How has this new knowledge changed your perception of the women's suffrage movement? What did you learn? What surprised you or challenged you? Why is this herstory important and relevant today? Or what will you do with this new knowledge? I'm going to open that up to anyone who wants to share.
So one of the things that I think is so important, and I'm sure everybody agrees with me, but the thing that strikes me as most important is that while we certainly, I mean, without question, have to look at this, what's really important is that as women, we have always been pushed into turning on each other. Mm-hmm. And I think that we have to find a way to acknowledge this, but remain united, because the chaos is part of the plan. Mm-hmm. And it's just very important that we remember that we are still one body and one power as well, as understanding this. And as important as that is, I just think it's really, really important that we don't look at this and begin to separate, because that's the desire. We have no power when we separate.
I always thought it was interesting, connecting that. I always thought it was interesting that these women, white suffragists, always thought that, like, oh, well, if we don't support black men vote, then we'll have a better chance of getting our vote. And I always thought that was just so interesting, because I don't know if it's the era in which I've been raised, but I feel like, you know, like you said, when we have community, when we band together, there's nothing really that can stop us. And when so many people come together, regardless of their identity, regardless of their belief, it becomes this kind of surge of power and voices. And I think that's what really makes change. I think when everyone, or a lot of people agree on one thing, that's what really brings about these big changes that we've had. And I think that is important to understand. And I agree with your point.
Yeah, we have to look at how we're comfortable as women, how we are truly comfortable, because a lot of times we are not comfortable moving forward. We allow ourselves to be pushed back 3 steps, and we find some reason to become off balance. And I don't have the answer for it, but I'm just saying that's the only way we're going to move forward as one body.
Yeah.
I want to applaud your use of resources and the texts and the research that went into all of this work. And I think, one, we always have to question, like, when you're reading a history book, right? Who's writing it? What are they including? What are they leaving out? And I think one of the things that strikes me is that right now it's so easy to search for something on the internet, and what comes up first is like the AI overview, and a lot of people accept that as truth. And I just feel like as a teacher, it's so rare that I see people reference a text that's written by a researcher, and so I applaud that.
Well, I have to confess that I knew so little of this, and I'm really old. So I totally admire and appreciate all that you've done. And the fact that you've shared it with me opened my eyes. And I guess as I'm sitting here toward the second half of this presentation, I'm thinking that the voices are important, and we can start right here at home. So anything you can do to, especially, the other thing that I've learned in my work is that people really love their local newspapers. Even still the hard copy, whether it be 7 Days or the Bridge. So I'm going to encourage you to publish in there. And I'm going to encourage all of you folks to submit and write letters as well. Because repetition is also a form of aggression. Excuse me. But we've got a long way to go here. So again, my appreciation and respect for all you've done.
On that note, I would like to draw your attention to Mila's bibliography that she made here. She's got some resources. We have some of them here, Bearpond Books, brought some books for you to peruse if you'd like to. And they're available at Bearpond Book for purchase as well. Or at the library to check out. Yeah. But please do grab a bibliography, because she put a lot of work into having some more research and reading for you to bring home with you.
Just take them and pass them.
Yeah, pass them around. Sure.
Yeah, I think you really definitely publishing or having some sort of blog or some sort of constantly. Because your education is so thorough.
And just to add to that, I forget the name.
Dottie.
Hi, Dottie. Maybe you could help organize a discussion group.
I'm definitely going to do that with the league.
Well, and maybe we can meet here in the library and just continue
this. Open it to others.
Yes, and figure out how, when we're out there at our rallies for all the other wealth of issues that we have to deal with, the right word, I don't think. But we can work our necessary protests and objections with a more feminist view.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And as Emmy said, I'm very busy, but I would love at some point to do a community discussion of this whole book, because I could only share 4 pages, but if anyone has the time to read it, or even just the full introduction or the first chapter about women's suffrage, it's a really great research, and it's very eye-opening. So.
Would you like me to pass around the board if people want to be included in an email about doing a discussion in the fall?
That would be great.
And do you want to promote?
Yes. Speaking of educational events, if you would like to attend something slightly similar to this,
Super feminist.
Yes. Una and Lula and Ella and Ani and Kayla, our whole group is here, are part of Her Vermont. It's Health Education and Rights Vermont. It's an activist organization the 6 of us started last spring, and we're doing a reproductive justice mural opening event at the Montpelier Performing Arts Hub next Saturday in the afternoon. March 29th.
March 29th.
Our seated capacity is almost full. There's also going to be standing room. If there's a couple of these flyers, you could also, if you write your email down, we can give you more information. But there's a QR code to RSVP. So
the mural is so gorgeous. I've seen it in person. It is beautiful.
And who are some of the speakers that are going to be coming?
Well, Dottie will be speaking, and we have former Governor Madeline Kunin. We have Kaya Morris and Esther Charleston, as well as a song from Patty Casey and a recorded video from Scott Stern, who researched a lot of reproductive justice history and wrote a book about it called The Trials of Nina McCall, and a recorded video from Congresswoman Beth Ballard.
This event is almost full. Would you be willing to film it so that we can put it out online?
So yeah, Zoom too. It will be on Zoom, so if you want to RSVP to get the Zoom link sent to you, Orca Media will also be there recording. So there will be ways to access it afterwards as well. And we have a website, hervermont.weebly.com, with a ton of resources from our research. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming.